Sorry, I didn't see you there. Welcome back to our next PyData sponsor interview. I'm James Powell. I serve as co-chair of the NumFOCUS Board of Directors and also as vice president of PyData. Today, I'm joined by Fred Rice from IBM Center for Open Source AI Technologies. He's going to tell us a little bit about how IBM uses the open source scientific computing tools that you and I love, as well as what he does at IBM's coding. Fred, could you introduce yourself to the PyData Global audience?
Sure. Hi, I'm Fred Rice, and I work for IBM. In fact, I've worked for IBM since 2006. And initially, I worked for IBM Research, but for the last about 5 years, I've worked for CODATE. That's the Center for Open Source Data and AI Technologies. We're an open source lab that covers foundational open source for data and AI in the enterprise.
Fred, can you tell us a little bit more about the IBM Center for Open Source Data and AI Technologies?
Sure. CODATE, as we like to call it, is a lab located in San Francisco, and we work on a stack of open source tools and technologies that are foundational to, well, AI across the enterprise and foundational to our products. Things like Apache Spark, TensorFlow, and PyTorch, and Onyx for deep learning, the Jupyter notebooks, Pandas, and scikit-learn ecosystem for model development and exploratory analysis, as well as Kubeflow for covering end-to-end AI on Kubernetes.
Fred, I understand you are employee number one at CODATE. What made
Yeah.
you so excited to start on this new journey?
I was approached by some IBM executives in late 2014 with the opportunity to start a new center. At the time, it was a center focused on Apache Spark, and we called it the Spark Technology Center. And it was a really exciting journey for me, going from being the first technical person on the team to growing the team, hiring people, creating our different projects, and a really exciting journey. And I learned a whole lot, and I've been able to work with a really talented team, and it's been so much fun working on that team. Now, over the years, our mission has changed a bit, or rather, we've achieved more clarity into what our mission is. When we started out, we figured that we would be all about Apache Spark, but then we found out that anyone who's using Apache Spark in the enterprise, well, they're using notebooks to write their Spark jobs. So you need to cover Jupyter. And some of those Spark jobs are going to be training models. So you need scikit-learn and TensorFlow and PyTorch to work with Spark. And so we started contributing to all of those open source projects. And then you want to run Spark on Kubernetes. So we started working with Spark on Kubernetes support, and we started getting into the early days of Kubeflow. And eventually we stood back and we realized we're no longer really the Spark Technology Center. We're a center that covers a wide variety of different AI tools. We started with Apache Spark, but we had to expand out to all of the tools that you need to make an end-to-end use case that involves Spark actually work. And so we rebranded ourselves as CODATE, the Center for Open Source Data and AI Technologies, and that's where we stand today, where we've been for a number of years. And I think that better describes our mission as it has turned out to be, which is to make this end-to-end stack of AI technologies all work together in an enterprise environment where you have a cloud to run your compute and where you have teams of people who need to work together and who need to work with the rest of their organization. There are a lot of unique challenges that you have in the context of AI and scientific computing when you move it into the enterprise that are unique to enterprise environments. And that's where we've had our focus, making this entire stack of tools work well in this environment.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the open source scientific computing tools that are in use at IBM, and specifically which tools are actively in use within your group in IBM?
Sure. Now IBM is a big company, and open source has been a major part of IBM going back 20, 30 years. Remember, we were the ones behind pushing Linux into the enterprise. way back then. And since then, we've continued to have a lot of open source. We have, I think at this point, over 60,000 IBM developers who actively work with open source in their daily lives. So on the scientific computing side, if there's an open source package that has any degree of use in the enterprise, chances are there's an IBM product that uses it as a dependency or in fact pushes it to the front as a major feature. Now, my own little corner of IBM is CODATE, the Center for Open Source Data and AI Technologies. And we work on a particular stack that is central to AI and data in the hybrid cloud. So Apache Spark for data processing, TensorFlow, PyTorch, and Onyx for deep learning, Jupyter Notebooks, and Pandas data frames, and things like scikit-learn for data analysis and exploratory analysis, as well as Kubeflow to cover getting all of these tools onto Kubernetes and making them work in the cloud, in a modern cloud.
Do you use PySpark as part of this stack?
Oh, absolutely, yes. In fact, we have a Spark committer on our team, Brian Cutler, who did a lot of the work behind the high performance UDFs in PySpark, the integration with Apache Arrow that lets you run user defined functions in PySpark and make them run really fast. That was largely Brian's work, and we have continued to contribute to Spark in general, but also to PySpark in particular, moving forward, because it's a really important part of IBM. We have like 24 products that Spark internally. So it's very important for us to maintain that strong relationship with the community and to give back code.
Do you use Dask at all?
We have some of our developer advocates have built use cases around Dask. It is not one of our primary environments to contribute to, just because there isn't that much alignment directly with IBM products. But because there's a lot of usage in the community, our advocacy team does work with Dask and shows how to do use cases on top of Dask.
Fred, do you have a chance to do coding day to day? What's your favorite open source tool?
My favorite open source tool is usually the one that I'm working with at the time. So right now, we are right on the cusp of releasing a project we call text extensions for pandas. And that's a series of extensions to pandas data frames to make them a universal data structure for natural language processing data. So I've worked on natural language processing off and on for about 12 years. Prior to working at CODATE, I was in the NLP group at IBM Almaden Research Center. And what I've always seen in making NLP applications is that managing the data is key there. You may have a model, a very sophisticated model, but the care and feeding of that model is what your day-to-day work is all about. And pandas, I've found, is such a compelling way to represent that natural language processing data and such a powerful tool for manipulating it that it's been like night and day for me, transitioning from the old way of doing things, writing basically straight line code, to using pandas. And now we've been contributing to pandas and also building around pandas extension types for representing some of the important concepts in natural language processing. And we built a library, like I said, called text extensions for pandas. And we're in the process of rolling that out. We've got an alpha release out. We're going to move to beta and then to final release. And it's been really exciting building that up, building out use cases. We've been talking it up internally with our product teams. So so to the long answer to your question would be pandas right now. And in particular, our extensions to it, text extensions for pandas, is what I'm really excited about and working on actively as far as coding.
What is the most exciting recent development in the open source community for you?
So for my team, a big exciting recent development is that we have a lot of IBM research technology around explainability and fairness in AI that we recently donated to the Linux Foundation as the AI Fairness 360, AI Explainability 360, and Adversarial Robustness 360 toolkits that gives state-of-the-art capabilities for making AI trusted and trustworthy in the enterprise, and that getting that into the Linux Foundation control, where it is out in the open under control of the foundation, under good governance, so that we can use it broadly across many different enterprises and that members of the industrial community can collaborate on it. That was a really big achievement in our organization, and we're very excited about having that technology out. We in my own team, we've built a lot of use cases around those. In fact, most recently we ported AI Fairness 360 to R. It was previously purely a Python tool, and got that got all of those APIs accessible to our users. Gabriela de Queiroz on our team is a major figure in the R data science community, and she and a couple other members of our team worked on that. So we're really excited to have that trusted AI portfolio now out as a completely community built project, and under control of the Linux Foundation.
What improvements would you like to see, or what pain points do you currently have with the open source tools that you use?
So there's pain points that I have, and there's pain points that, shall we say, our clients, our customers, our product lines have. At the big picture in terms of pain points right now, when I'm speaking as the chief architect for Codate, is that we have all of these tools that we built for data and AI, and most of them were built before the enterprise moved onto Kubernetes and the hybrid cloud. And a lot of our work in the last year and a half has been about how do we adapt all these tools to work in this new world of the hybrid cloud. So that's part of why we have a big presence in the Kubeflow project, which is largely about getting tools to work on top of Kubernetes and making AI work better on Kubernetes. But also we have worked a lot on getting Jupyter notebooks to work in a containerized environment. For example, if you start up your Jupyter Lab environment, right, and you have 6 tabs, unless you're careful, those are all going to run in the same machine. And so if you're training 6 different models, they're all going to try and grab, all those tabs are going to try and grab the same GPU. With our Lyra project, we can get each of those tabs in your Jupyter Lab environment running on a separate container under Kubernetes. And that kind of capability really opens up productivity for someone who's working on a team with a cloud backend. Also, another thing that's been really important for us has been the ability to quickly author a collection of notebooks into a batch job and send that off to the cloud. So that's another part of our Lyra work on Jupyter. On a more personal level, again, I've been working lately on pandas, and also more tightly on the Python stack. And there, I think the big thing that is standing in a lot of individual developers' ways is the global interpreter lock. Your Python code is kind of constrained to be single-threaded. And so whenever you're working with data and AI with Python, you often run into a situation where things are going really, really smoothly. And then you've got to all of a sudden transition into attaching a bunch of libraries to your Python stack. And so that's where I think it's really important that we continue to move forward with technologies like Dask. And also we've been keeping an eye on Ray. And of course, we have worked on getting PySpark working better with the Python stack. But I think that the industry as a whole, we still need to move forward on getting parallelism to work better in a Python environment.
Tell me, Fred, does your team at IBM work on any open source projects directly? Do you contribute back to any of the community supported projects, or do you originate your own extensions to Jupyter Lab or additional novel open source work?
All of the above. So we do a lot of contributions to community-run projects. So some examples of that would be we have committers on Apache Spark, we have a committer on PyTorch, we have maintainers on TensorFlow components, we have the distinguished contributors, which is what they call them in the Jupyter notebook space as a result of our Jupyter work. And so we do a lot of contributions to established projects. We also establish our own projects. For example, the kubeflow operator used to be a project that we established, but then we donated that technology to kubeflow. And then there's in between. So a lot of our work in Jupyter has been under the auspices of a project called Elira, which started out as IBM code, in fact, code that we wrote to solve some problems that our products had. And then we made it an IBM open source project. And then we made it a Jupyter sub project. And that's where it stayed. Right now it's a Jupyter sub project. And it's part of the Jupyter ecosystem. And we've been seeing functionality migrate from Elira to Jupyter Server. And that's great. And so we move fluidly throughout all different kinds of contribution, both contributing to established community-run projects, starting our own projects, or anywhere in between, and transitioning from one mode to the next. It's, whatever is going to get that code out there into the hands of the people that need to use it. That's what we do.
What makes IBM so motivated to help sponsor the open source scientific computing ecosystem, and specifically the PyData conference series?
There are several different reasons. So partly because a lot of the users of IBM products are working with the PyData stack. Anyone who's using Cloud Pak for data, anyone who's using Watson Studio, anyone who's using our Spectrum computing, high performance computing stack, they are going to be using PyData technology and stuff managed by NumFOCUS under the covers. And it's very important for us as a company to maintain a good connection to our users, because at the end of the day, our products are about making those users productive so that they can get stuff done for their employers, who are the ones who are buying these products from us. And having a good connection to PyData gets us that connection to all those data scientists and all those developers and all those architects who are building solutions on a daily basis using IBM products. That's one reason that we like to be connected strongly to the PyData community. Another reason is that we incorporate a lot of PyData technology in our products, things like Jupyter and just Python as a whole. NumPy is everywhere, for example. And as a result of incorporating that, we also do a lot of contributions back. And if you're contributing code to an open source project, it's very important to maintain a connection to the community of contributors. And at conferences like PyData, you'll see not just the users, but also the contributors. So we need to maintain that connection with the users and to maintain that connection with the contributors. And of course, we also see a lot of thought leaders who talk with the PyData community, and we want to have a two-way communication with them too. So it's very important to maintain a connection to PyData. IBM sponsors dozens of PyData events every year, many meetups, the occasional conference. We sometimes donate to the projects themselves. We have a very active relationship going back a long way with PyData.
So Fred, I understand IBM has directly supported Linux Foundation AI, specifically AI Fairness 360, AI Explainability 360, and another initiative about model robustness. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
So IBM Research has developed a lot of technology around in the area of trusted AI, and we had open sourced this technology as a collection of toolkits, as you were saying, AI Fairness 360, AI Explainability 360, Adversarial Robustness 360, and these had been IBM run open source projects, but earlier this year we donated them to the Linux Foundation under the Linux Foundation AI initiative. And we're really happy to have those projects under open governance. In general, IBM is a big proponent of open governance. We like to see all the members of the industry working together on open source. We think that everyone wins that way. And we're also really proud of this technology. It's an entire stack for trusted AI, for bringing trust and transparency to AI development, for making models that aren't biased, for making models that are going to resist attacks. and generally building up the level of trust that a lot of our the clients that we work with, for example, in highly regulated industries, need to have around their models. And versions of this technology are in our products, but we think it's really important to have an open version and to maintain that strong connection between them. So we're really proud to have donated all that cutting edge technology to the Linux Foundation this year.
So Fred, is there any final message you'd like to leave for the PyData Global community?
Just that IBM remains really committed to open source. We've been involved with open source for a very long time as a member of the community of enterprise companies that work with open source. Open source is really foundational to our entire product line. And IBM really wants open source to be under open governance so that all the members of the industry can work together and create that open foundation. And then we can all build on top of that and make the technology stack work better for everyone.
Thank you for joining us, Fred. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I really enjoyed hearing about how IBM makes open governance a priority. As all of you know, that's something that's near and dear to my heart, and it's near and dear to the mission, the core mission of PyData and NumFOCUS.
Thanks, James. It's been great talking with you about open source at IBM and my own little corner of that big IBM open source world. And we're really happy to be here at PyData and to be sponsoring the conference. As you know, open source and open governance are really important for IBM. Just really happy to be here.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I really enjoyed that conversation with Fred. I look forward to seeing you again in the next sponsor interview that we do. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everyone.